React uses something called JSX, which looks a lot like HTML, but it's actually JavaScript under the hood. In JavaScript, this sort of syntax is not valid. The browser would treat it as malformed HTML or throw a syntax error because it looks like HTML inside JavaScript code. In React world, JSX makes it easier to build and visualize our user interface, but the catch being browsers don't understand JSX. And this is where Babel comes in. Babel is a tool that takes our JSX code and transforms it into plain vanilla JavaScript that browsers can run. Think of it like a translator. We write in JSX because it's easier, but Babel translates it to something the browser actually understands. You can consider this example where the top level example is the JSX code, like for example this line, but it would get translated to proper JavaScript here below using Babel. In case you didn't notice, our React components have a JSX extension on the file, which Babel would see and apply its translation to convert them to JS files under the hood. Now that you have some idea about what JSX and Babel are, let's continue with our task of building a React component. But first, let's do some cleanup. When we created our app using npm create vite latest command, Vite added some temporary example code in our project to help us get started. But now that code is in our way. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all files in source folder as well as this vite.svg file in the public folder. Good. So by removing these files, we are starting with a clean slate, which helps us understand exactly what's going on as we build. And now I'm going to create two files from scratch, and creating these files will give us a minimal structure to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and recreate main.jsx and app.jsx. App.jsx is our first React component. So let me type its code first and then I'll explain. All right, that is it. So this function called app is a React component, essentially a small reusable piece of your web page. The return statement is where we define what shows on the screen. Here it's an h1 heading element that says hello world. So even though this code looks like HTML, it's actually JSX, meaning JavaScript is powering this structure. Finally, we need to export this component so that we can use it in other parts of our project. And the way to do it is through a statement export default app. Now this file is complete. Let's turn to our next file, which is main.jsx. So again, let me type the code first and then we'll explain. Okay, before I start explaining this file, let's quickly have a look at the index.html file, which is still untouched. So have a look at this body element. It has two things. One is a div element with ID root, and the other is a script tag, which is referencing the source/main.jsx file, which we were just editing. Right? Just keep these two things in mind, and let's go back to main.jsx and let me explain further. So main.jsx is the main entry point of our React app, the first thing that runs when our project starts. Let's break it down. The import statements at the top let us bring code from other files or libraries into this file, like borrowing tools from a toolbox. So import from modules like React DOM/client look different from local files like app.jsx because modules come from external libraries. React DOM is an external library and app is not. App is our local file. We use curly braces for named exports like create root, but not for default exports like app. We are not going to go in full detail in the crash course, but just keep in mind React DOM/client is a much bigger file than our app file, and it has multiple exports, right? So we are just referencing one named export from that file. That is why we are using curly braces. In contrast, app is the default export and is the only one, so no curly braces are needed. Now here's the interesting part. Let's first focus on this part, which those of you who know DOM manipulation would instantly recognize. This part finds a div with the ID root in our index.html file. and we just saw it in the index.html, React creates something called a root, which is where our entire app would be injected. So the create root function is past that particular element from index.html, and it's going to render the app component at that point. And this is the syntax for rendering the component. In angle brackets, we write the component name or the function name from app.jsx and terminate in an HTML style end tag. Note that without JSX, we'd have to write more complex and less readable JavaScript code to build our UI, but JSX makes it much more cleaner and more intuitive. But thanks to Babel, we never have to worry about the browser not understanding this. Right, time to see that in action. So let me go back to my browser. And here it is, our very first React component live in the browser. This immediate feedback loop is what makes React development so interactive and fun. And note that we didn't even have to refresh it. The npm run dev command that we executed earlier is still running, and whatever changes we make in the code are going to be available instantly. For example, if I go back and in app.jsx I add two extra exclamation marks, save the code. The development server is watching, so if I go back, here we see the changes showing up instantly in the browser. Perfect. So with this basic component in place, we are ready to build more dynamic and interactive elements as we continue our journey with React.